It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name. Quiet patch of America, tucked between endless fields of corn and the slow rhythm of a town that hadn't changed in decades. Fargo, North Dakota's simple streets, old diners, church bells on Sundays. Life there seemed frozen in time, untouched by the chaos of the outside world, but beneath that calm surface, something sinister was about to emerge. On a warm spring night in 2014, a college student named Ethan Crowley vanished without a trace. At first, no one worried. Fargo was safe. Fargo was predictable. People assumed he'd gone off on his own, maybe just needed a break from the pressure of exams. But when hours turned into days, and days into weeks, fear began to creep into every corner of the town. Ethan wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was young, bright, trustworthy, the kind of person who lit up every room he entered. And suddenly he was gone. What followed would unravel a nightmare so chilling, so disturbing that even Netflix wouldn't dare tell the story. This is the case of Ethan Crowley. A murder too disturbing for Hollywood, too disturbing for streaming, but not too disturbing for us. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the hidden crimes we uncover from America's quietest towns. Because tonight, we're about to dive into a story that begins like a whisper, but ends in a scream. Fargo had always been the kind of place that outsiders overlooked. Flat horizons stretched endlessly, stitched together by highways and train tracks that seemed to vanish into the distance. Main Street was lined with small shops, a handful of diners, and the glow of neon signs that flickered against the night sky. It was a place where life was simple. People trusted their neighbors. For families who had lived there for generations, the town carried a sense of safety. Doors were left unlocked. Kids rode bikes after sunset. When crime did happen, it was usually something minor: broken window, a petty theft, a drunken fight after a football game. Murders. Those belonged in the headlines of bigger cities, not in Fargo. Ethan Crowley embodied that innocence. At just 20 years old, he was the youngest son of a family known in the community for their farm just outside town. His father, Mark, was quiet and hard-working. His mother, Evelyn, the type of woman who brought pies to the church fundraiser every year. Ethan was different, though. While his family stayed rooted in tradition, Ethan was ambitious. He had dreams of leaving Fargo, of becoming something more than just another name in the town registry. He enrolled at the local state college, majoring in criminal justice. Friends described him as curious, optimistic, and maybe a little naive. He wanted to help people, to make a difference, maybe even to join law enforcement one day. But that same optimism, that trusting nature, may have been what made him vulnerable at night. Ethan worked part-time at a small cafe near the campus. Regulars remembered his warm smile and easy conversation. He wasn't the kind of young man who made enemies. If anything, people admired him. But as it would turn out, someone hidden in the quiet fabric of Fargo saw him differently. The Crowleys had no reason to suspect that anything dark was circling their son. Ethan never complained of threats. He never hinted at trouble. And yet, beneath the ordinary rhythm of farm life and schoolwork, a shadow was growing. What no one knew then was that Ethan had recently become involved with people far outside his world. People whose names were whispered only in hushed tones around town. People connected not to farming or school, but to a darker undercurrent running just beneath Fargo's calm surface. At first it seemed harmless conversations here and there, late-night meetings that he brushed off as study sessions, but those closest to him would later recall the change. How Ethan had started looking over his shoulder. How he sometimes went quiet mid-sentence, as if his mind had wandered somewhere. He didn't want to go. To the Crowleys, Ethan was still their boy, their pride. To his friends, he was the same old Ethan. But in truth, he had already stepped into something he could never step back from. And soon, Fargo would awaken to a horror it had never known before. It was May 1st, 2014. Finals week at the state college. The air was still cool, though spring had already painted the fields in soft green. Ethan spent most of the day on campus, attending classes, laughing with friends. and preparing for an exam he had been nervous about. He looked tired, but not unusually so. Nothing about his demeanor suggested that this would be the last time anyone would see him alive. That evening, he left his dorm around 11 p.m. He told his roommate he was heading out for a quick drive. No explanation, no details, just a casual, "I'll be back." But Ethan never came back. The next morning, when his bed was still empty, his roommate assumed he had crashed at a friend's place. By afternoon, his phone went straight to voicemail. By evening, panic set in. Ethan's parents were called. The police were notified. The clock began ticking on what would soon become Fargo's most haunting mystery. At first, investigators treated it as a typical missing person case. A college kid, stressed by finals. Maybe he'd run away. Maybe he needed space. But Ethan's family insisted that wasn't like him. He was responsible. He always checked in. He always came home. The search stretched across campus, through farmland, down the quiet back roads of Cass County. Flyers with his photograph, Ethan's kind eyes, and easy smile covered telephone poles and cafe windows. Volunteers combed the fields, calling out his name. Days turned into weeks, and the break. On June 27th, nearly 2 months after Ethan vanished, a farmer spotted something in the Red River, just south of Breckenridge, along the North Dakota-Minnesota border. At first glance, it looked like debris caught in the reeds. But as the farmer approached, his breath caught. It wasn't debris. It was a body, waterlogged, motionless, face pale against the dark current. It was Ethan. The scene was chilling. Round his neck was a heavy backpack, filled with rocks, as if someone had wanted to ensure that his body would never surface. The young man who once dreamed of helping others had been silenced in the cruelest way possible. But the questions began immediately. Had Ethan been murdered? Or had he chosen this fate himself? The police leaned toward suicide. The weight in the backpack, they argued, could have been placed there by Ethan himself. But his family rejected that notion outright. Ethan had too much to live for. Depressed, he wasn't reckless. Something else was at play, and then came the whispers. Rumors that Ethan had been working with people far more dangerous than anyone in Fargo wanted to admit. That he had gotten involved in something tied to drugs, to undercover deals, to forces that moved silently through small towns like theirs. The discovery of his body didn't bring closure. It opened a door to even darker suspicions, because if Ethan hadn't taken his own life, then someone out there had wanted him dead, and the real horror was only beginning. When Ethan's body was pulled from the Red River, the official line came swiftly. Suicide. The authorities spoke in calm, measured tones at the press conference. They said it was a tragedy, a young man under pressure, crushed by the weight of expectations. Case closed. But to Ethan's family, those words rang hollow. They knew their son, they knew his dreams. They knew he would never fill a backpack with rocks and sink himself into the current. And in Fargo, a place where gossip spread faster than truth, the whispers grew louder. It doesn't make sense. The pressure forced investigators to dig deeper. What they found cracked open a door no one wanted to admit existed. Ethan Crowley, the small-town college kid with a spotless record, had been working as a confidential informant for a regional drug task force. That revelation changed everything. Suddenly, the narrative of a simple suicide became something far darker. Ethan hadn't been just a student. He had been wired up, secretly recording deals on campus. He had been pushed into late-night meetings with people he barely knew. He had been carrying the weight of secrets, too heavy for a 20-year-old. And once that truth surfaced, the interrogations began. The first was with a fellow student, a roommate of one of Ethan's closest friends. The boy looked terrified as he sat across the metal table in the sheriff's office. His voice cracked as the recorder clicked on. Asterisk. Did you see Ethan the night he disappeared? The boy's hands trembled. He rubbed his palms against his jeans. Yeah, I saw him, but he wasn't alone. Who was with him? The detective pressed. A pause, heavy breathing. 2 guys, older, not students. They drove up in a dark car. Ethan got in. He didn't look like he wanted to go, but he didn't say anything. Did you recognize them? The boy shook his head. No, but I'd seen them before. Hanging around the cafe where Ethan worked, they gave me a bad feeling. Like trouble. The detectives scribbled notes, exchanged looks. Another lead. Another set of shadows. Pulling the story away from suicide and deeper into the unknown. A week later, another interrogation. This time, the suspect wasn't a nervous student. It was a known dealer, already under investigation by the task force. He sat back in his chair with a smirk, chewing gum as if enjoying the theater of it all. Ethan, he laughed, kid, was to clean. Everyone knew it. He didn't belong in this world. The detective leaned forward. Did you hurt him? The smirk widened. I didn't have to. Someone else would. He was marked from the start. You don't send a lamb into a den of wolves. Are you saying he was killed? The dealer tapped the table with 2 fingers, slow and deliberate. I'm saying. He lowered his voice, leaning in so close the recorder picked up the hiss. Of his breath? Asked the cops who made him an informant. The room fell silent. The detectives glanced at each other, but no one pushed further. It was a dangerous suggestion. Hint that the rot wasn't just in the streets, it had been inside the very walls of the task force. But the interrogations didn't stop. There, Ethan's professors, his friends, his coworkers, all were pulled in for questioning. Each had fragments, small pieces of a puzzle that never quite fit together. A classmate remembered Ethan whispering that he felt trapped. A coworker recalled him checking the door every few minutes, as if waiting for someone to walk in. His roommate admitted Ethan had been quieter than usual, keeping secrets, staring out the window late at night, and yet, nothing concrete surfaced. No single name, no smoking gun. The autopsy offered little clarity. No drugs in his system, no alcohol, no blunt force trauma. Just a body with a weighted backpack, found in a river he never had reason to be near. The medical examiner listed the manner of death as undetermined, but the police leaned hard on suicide. Still, the whispers grew. Parents in town began warning their kids, don't talk to strangers, don't get too close to the wrong crowd. Students murmured in dorms about Ethan being set up. Farmers at diners whispered about corruption. Fargo, once a place of safety, was now a place of suspicion. And as the interrogations stacked up, one thing became clear. The story wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about the system that had used him, chewed him up, and discarded him. The Crowleys refused to back down. They attended every hearing. They demanded records, files, names. And with every stone they overturned, more shadows crawled out. Had Ethan been betrayed by the very criminals he was forced to investigate? Or had he been betrayed by the people who swore to protect him? The truth slipped through their fingers like river water, always there, but impossible to hold. And then came the most chilling moment of all. A detective, speaking off the record, muttered quietly to a reporter, some cases aren't meant to be solved. Some are meant to be buried. By the fall of 2014, the name Ethan Crowley had become a wound that Fargo couldn't heal. The official story was suicide. The whispers said otherwise. Caught between them was a family that refused to let their son's memory be reduced to a statistic. The Crowleys pushed for answers. They demanded investigations, hearings, accountability, and piece by piece, truth began to leak out. Court documents revealed that Kutzen had been recruited as a confidential informant after being caught with a small amount of marijuana, barely enough to warrant a fine. Instead, he was threatened with felony charges and a ruined future unless he cooperated. So with no lawyer present, no parent by his side, he was pressured into signing papers that would bind him to dangerous undercover work. A college sophomore, barely 20 years old, thrown into the shadows of drug deals he had no business being part of, for months. Ethan walked that razor's edge, wearing a wire, reporting names, handing over evidence. But something went wrong. Someone found out, or maybe someone inside knew more than they admitted. Either way, Ethan's secret wasn't safe anymore. The last night he was seen alive. He told a friend he feared he wouldn't make it to graduation. He was right. The backpack weighted with rocks, the river, the silence from officials who rushed to close the case. All of it pointed to one chilling reality. Ethan Crowley didn't choose to die. Someone chose for him, yet no one was ever charged. No one was ever held accountable. The police stood by their initial ruling. The Drug Task Force washed its hands of the matter, and Ethan's parents were left with nothing but grief and unanswered questions. The town moved on, at least on the surface. But in quiet corners, in coffee shops, in whispers at the local church, in late-night conversations, people still wonder, did Fargo's safety come at the cost of one young man's life? Was Ethan a victim of the criminals he was investigating? Or of the very system that was supposed to protect him? The truth lies buried somewhere in the muddy waters of the Red River, and perhaps it will stay there, hidden forever. But one thing is certain. Ethan Crowley's story is a warning, a reminder that even in America's quietest towns, darkness waits just beneath the surface. And sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones lurking in alleyways. They're the ones wearing badges, making deals in fluorescent-lit offices, deciding fates behind closed doors. This was the chilling murder of Ethan Crowley. Too disturbing for Netflix, but never too disturbing for us. If you found this story as haunting as we did, don't forget to subscribe to Quiet Town Crimes and ring the notification bell, because in America's smallest towns are more secrets waiting to be uncovered.